So now let's look at the VNC alternative, which uses a different protocol, VNC as opposed to SSH and X11. So visually it's similar, nonetheless it differs. So SUSE server, VNC base installation. So again, same thing. Features are similar. It's network base and allows you to install from a remote client. So installed from remote client, the operating system. Same thing, requires limited effort on the server side. So you could have a junior administrator, someone with lesser skills, get the first part going for you. And this uses the VNC protocol as opposed to, say, SSH with X11. But both provide the same functionality. So, tasks. 1. Provision guest on ESXi. And that we know how to do. Let's pop back over, see what's going on. So we've got 1 and 2. Let's provision 3. And obviously we could just clone the existing instances, which would save us a lot of time. But nonetheless, using the operating system facilities is important. So we'll just go through the motions for the sake of knowing how to implement insofar as the OS is concerned. So SUSE 1164-bit is the choice for us. 1 gig memory, that's fine. Back to the flat network, VM network, which is the basic network, the first VLAN created as a consequence of the installation of ESXi. Same thing, new virtual disk. 16 is more than enough, 20 is even better. And let's just have this boot with the same ISO image. Again, if you have access to the smaller boot image, use that by all means, as it'll reduce your footprint. But 4 gigs nowadays is no big deal, so we're just defaulting to the lone ISO image that we have. This, well, 3 gig ISO image. Let's ensure that it's connected at power on, and that's it. We should be able to fire this up and give it the options that are relevant. So let's power this on, console it, and get a hold of this console. And of course, we'll have a string to supply, VNC equals 1, enable, binary, on, VNC password. Set it's the same thing as we did before. As you can see, this isn't responding. Let's go back here and make sure we reacquaint, because sometimes it just doesn't get the signal. Let's try this again. Sometimes we actually have to reset it for it to pick up the console. This time it's got it. That's good. That's more like it. So, boot string, VNC equals enabled. VNC password equals the same password, install SUSE 12. And that'll do it. The default VGA or Super VGA is fine for us. You could specify a different resolution, and if you have a different source, well, we have a source that's available we could use, for example. So it's SUSE 12. And we want to do, say, HTTP, since we've been doing the DVD ISO so far. And this is going to be 75101 / SUSE 12. Actually, let's double check that. We might have missed a character there. That's more like it. So that should be good. Now we can proceed with the installation. And this will prompt us to connect from the VNC client using the password once it's obtained an address. Again, you could optionally specify a static address using the host IP option. This screen is simply covered as it's usually unimportant when it's performing the request, detecting hardware, storage network, performing the request for an address, and so on. It by default returns only the useful information, that is, how to connect to it via one of the protocols such as SSH or VNC and so on and so forth. This, again, as we've mentioned, our installation media happens to be a removable, portable SATA 3 drive, so it doesn't always wake up within the timeout or the grace period allowed, which is probably a second or several milliseconds or something along those lines. So here we see the instructions, moments, well, 7528 is the address, YAS is now starting, so it says here, to connect using VNC client to display number 1, which is equivalent to port 5801. And when YAS is finished, close VNC, and then return to this window, which is the console. So the IP address, importantly, is 7528, and the instance of VNC is 1. Well, 5801 is if you're using Java. 5901 is if you're using the regular VNC client. So VNC supports both Java connectivity as well as the native VNC protocol. 5901 is native, 5801 or 58XX is Java, 59XX is native VNC. So we should be able to connect. Let's go back over to our node. Now, which VNC client are we going to use? The one that's included, that's installed by default. So provision, and part of the provision process, obviously, boot prompt, enter use, or in this case, VNC equals 1, VNC password equals whatever the password is, install SLES12 for us. Set any other options that are applicable, so set applicable options, i.e. HTTP source, and then connect. So connect via VNC client. So i.e. VNC viewer, which is installed by default. And it's a Tiger VNC implementation, so we're going to do a VNC viewer. And that's going to pop up in this window. Let's find this VNC viewer, pop that up, and we want to connect to 7528 to the first window. Now, the first window is usually the default window, so let's see if it's able to connect. Let's tell it options here, 7528. Let's see the screen. It should know to connect to the first screen. And let's see what we're missing here. Cancel this option, this window. Let's try :1. Now it works. So it's defaulting to 0 in that case. SLES12. And there's the installer. So from the VNC client, which we could have passed it a shell, connect to 192.168.75.28:1, and then supply password. And then commence or continue the installation. So continue installation as we did. So we want this system to be provisioned like the rest of the systems. So let's go ahead. Now notice we're missing a part of the screen here. The resolution is a bit too much for our screen. Let's see what we can do to adjust things. Just need a little working room. And let's move forward. So we'll agree. Just have to move the screen around just a little bit, just to get resolution right. But this fits now. And as we've proceeded before, this is how we will continue the installation. So it becomes rather straightforward after you initialize your installation type. So let's skip the registration as usual and continue with this installation. Default user. And default settings that we've indicated. We'll probably end up clobbering this installation and just cloning it, just to have a module on cloning using ESXi. Here are the different password encryption types, 512 being the strongest currently available for this release. Software, let's turn off the GUI. In fact, you can just change, you can have the GUI and change the systemd target from GUI to text mode in the event that you needed the GUI for some particular reason. So just keep that in mind as well. But more footprint, more potential problems, more security patches that have to be applied, and so on. So keep that in mind as well. That's also another headache, another issue that needs to be considered. So the less you have installed, the better. So if you don't need it, take it off. So insofar as the GUI is concerned, let's just get rid of this altogether. Sometimes you'll need the libraries to export graphical programs back to clients, so you may have to at some point install some X-related items or libraries to be able to have applications run on the server but display on the client. So that can be an issue. Here's the systemd target. This can be text mode. And again, this can be text mode in conjunction with the GUI. So let's take a look what it did to the systemd target. So systemd, the installer is recommending default to graphical. GUI on the target. Well, GUI on the target means we have to make sure that that software is available. So back again to the graphical environment, X and GNOME. And the systemd target doesn't necessarily have to be GUI. It can be text with a GUI library available. And as far as firewall, SSH will be open. VNC will also be open. Presumably we'll be connecting using VNC to the SUSE instance. So this looks, again, standard configuration looks fine. Again, the boot code, you can place it in the MBR. It'll still boot the system. We haven't tried that option. If you click install, it'll place it there and then it won't install it. Let's go ahead and install. And this will repeat the process we've just gone through. So we'll let this run. And there's artifactual data in the background from the execution of VNC. That happens from time to time with the shell, so that can be ignored as well. And that's it. This will go. We'll probably want to stall this or elapse it a bit while it copies the files out, pick it up at a later percentage, and just see the installation to its end. Again, we're more than likely going to clobber this installation, as we don't need more than 3 nodes to illustrate our point. So we'll probably clobber this and clone it from an existing instance, such as 1 or 2, or maybe we'll just clone this to a new instance and then clobber this original one. We'll come up with some sort of configuration, but for now, let's just pause and move on. So if you picked up towards the end, this is looking good as usual, no errors. So let's just wrap this installation up. And of course, SUSE includes all the latest support for integration, like with Samba version 4 Active Directory, NFS 4.1, etc. So you can always expect with the latest instances or the latest distros, the latest stacks for interoperating with different providers out there. So that shouldn't come as a surprise. So we should be up and running soon with this particular node. Then we'll be able to move on, finally start using the product. So this is at 95 roughly. Just give it a little more time. And this is more like it. So that cuts the VNC session. Let's take a look back at the console to see where we are. Well, this is already ready to go. And if you leave it, it'll by default boot the default option. Now we set a target of text, so it should take us to the console, to the TTY. 1 as opposed to 7 for graphical boot. And there's the interface. And of course, the host name is off. The IP is also off. It's DHCP driven. In terms of listeners, let's do an NTL. So because we installed using VNC, it set up VNC listeners for Java and for the normal VNC protocol. So that's something that might need to be changed in the event that you don't want to support VNC. But it means you can still connect to the server using VNC at this point, but it is running in text mode. So for example, let's pop back over here. Let's get a new instance of VNC going. And let's see what it comes up with here. And notice it's empty because we're not actually in the graphical target. So let's pop back over. So it's currently useless, so disabling it would be helpful. So this looks good. If this is a system we want to clone, let's just make a few changes. Well, DHCP is a good way to go, but the hostname is actually a good way to go as well because it's generic and can be modified from there. So maybe this is a good template with which to duplicate, triplicate, etc. So with that said, let's shut it. And we should be finished with this one. So this is VNC. Let's pop back over. And we'll get ready for our next task, which is just quickly clone an existing instance. Let's just ensure that it's shut, and it is shut, so we can move forward.